Hello everyone, it is time for today's live stream. I have no coffee today, we are doing Pepsi. So in case you don't have a drink yet, you should grab one because this would be kind of an in-depth conversation. We're going to talk about PAR today, and PAR is the ability to measure the light within your aquarium. This gets massively debated. There's so much information about this, and there's, like I said, the debating it's exhausting. Because people like, oh, you got to measure PER, you got to measure PAR, you got to measure this. That's not valid. If you're measuring blue, it's incorrect. Yes, we understand that there are limitations to how we are measuring our aquariums. But you know what? I've been talking about PAR for the last, I don't know, 15 years, 16 years. And the bottom line is, we all have like a certain tool that we can buy and measure the light in our aquarium. And if we all have the same tool and we're measuring, we should be able to come up with some statistical data to work together as a unit to understand what our corals are receiving, what they're lacking, and how to make their corrections. Now, if you don't have such a meter, you're just guessing. Just like if you don't have a way to measure salinity, you're just tasting the water to see what the salinity is. That's not going to work either. There is some guesswork in this hobby, but there's certain tools we can use. The PAR meters that we first came out with were digital, and it looked more like maybe it was a repurposed. It looked like a voltage meter, where you could measure ohms and volts and amps, and then they just changed it to make it measure PAR. So a PAR meter is this one here is from Apogee, and I'm just going to open up the box here carefully. So there's my meter with the wire. It comes with a small screwdriver with their name on it, which I've never lost. There's a little cap on top of the probe sensor itself that's going to keep falling off, so I'm just going to set it aside. This is the second version of a PAR meter I've purchased from Apogee. The first one I got looked yellow, and it's in the article that I linked in this video's description. So if you're wanting an in-depth article that really goes into this and you don't want to sit through a live stream, you can just read that later if you like. This meter is battery powered. The last one was as well. This is the sensor itself, and it has a screw on the bottom. Hopefully it came with a screw. It should. If it didn't, you can just find what it matches by going to Home Depot. And then there has to be a way to hold it in your aquarium. Now, I have always had an acrylic handle. So this is mine, and it's actually more than 24 inches tall with a flat handle at the top, so I can hold it, and I can actually look at the top and see if my meter is level. Because when you've got the probe at the bottom, if your handle is tilted, you're measuring at an angle, right? And so I can look at the handle and I can see if the handle is flat, if it's angled, if it's tilted. And that kind of gives me some information of what's happening in my aquarium as I'm working. I also put markings on here from the top of the sensor itself. Once it's screwed into place on here on the bottom, there's a small hole. When it's mounted, from the top of the sensor to this point here is 6 inches, 12 inches, 18, and 24. And I have been just using this arm for years and years and years because it's something you only measure occasionally. You don't measure PAR all the time. Now, Neptune Systems came out with a PMK. I meant to bring that in here as well so that way you could see that kit, but I'm not even sure where I put it. It's in the back room somewhere. I bought that for my own reef tank and never used it. But what it is, it's one of these sensors that somehow plugs into the Apex ecosystem. Maybe it's an Aquabus cable, I'm not positive. And there's a small rock that you mount this in, and you can just put that rock somewhere in your tank and just let it measure PAR all day long from sunrise to sunset, and then you can look at the data in Fusion later and see how it did, and kind of get an idea. And then the next day you could move the rock to a new spot, you could measure there, and that way you can kind of keep track of what's going on. For me, I'm kind of a do it once and then put it away for a few months or even longer. Now, yesterday, Ashley came over and I said, I'd really love the help with this project if you don't mind. And she goes, no, I'd be happy to help. And so we went ahead and we measured the PAR in the aquarium, and that was last night's reef diary. So if you haven't seen it yet, that's what we're talking about right now, because there's really more to say than what was in that video. The number one rule of measuring PAR, I'm kind of just trying not to drop this. This sensor right here needs to be pointed directly at the source. So we'll take our lovely can of Pepsi here. See, promo. And if this was my source of light and this is my sensor, this would be an inaccurate way to measure. Even though you'd think that's the logical way to do it, you actually want to have the probe pointing at the light source itself to get that amount of intensity that's coming off of the light. So if you have an LED fixture of some kind, whether it's a Radion or a Kessel or a Sky or a Reef Phi, or just the hundreds of brands of LEDs you have, point the sensor toward the light itself, no matter where it is in your tank. If this is the front of the tank and the light is back here, you tilt the sensor this way to point toward the light source. And if you're between two separate light fixtures, pick the one closest nearby, and again, measure it that way, and then you go to the next spot, tilt it this way, and you go to the back, tilt it forward. We want to keep pointing it toward the epicenter of where the light is located. And if you do that, you'll get your most accurate readings. Now, I do not turn off the flow in my tank when I measure, because that is how corals receive light. And what I mean by that is, if you put this sensor in the water and there's a lot of rippling, the numbers on this display are going to jump all over the place. It's going to just go brr, 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 brr. It's crazy. It's actually hard to follow. For example, right now, if I just hold this up, it's saying that my par in this room is like 8 or 9. Nothing, right? But if there was water rippling, this might say 16, 7, 48, 8, 7, 9, 14, 28, 7, 2, 15, 4. That's what happens when you have flow in the tank. And I actually find that to be more accurate, because that is how the coral is receiving the light, because all those ripples are creating a constant change of how the light is coming through. It's not going through a pure cube of glycerin. It is going through a moving, motionful body of water. And there's even particulates going in the way, and there's fish that swim over and create a brief shadow as they go overhead. And the coral is absorbing all these different intensities of light. The photosynthetic active radiation, I don't know. I never get that right. I usually look it up and then I forget exactly what it stands for. I just know it's called PAR. And so that is how I measure my tank. And so I will look at the gauge, or the reading on my screen, and I'll watch it for about 10 seconds to 20 seconds to kind of get the idea of what the highest it is, what the lowest it is, and kind of what's the average median. That is the number I write down when I do my PAR measurements. So like, for example, last night, let me pull up some pictures here for you. Got to figure where I put everything because I was very busy last night. Okay, good, they're in here. This right here is the front of the tank. I'm going to throw it on the screen. And the measurements you're looking at are the measurements directly at the glass itself. They're not in the middle of the tank. So I'm not measuring where that skunk clownfish is, for example. I am measuring the front panel of glass, like 2-3 inches away from the glass, going straight down. And my PAR meter was measuring somewhere around 145 down on the sand, 138, and 160 in that front corner under the copper band butterfly fish. That is a general normal amount of light to get down on your sand bed. And then as you work your way up, the number goes up and up. Now, some people like to have their numbers much, much higher, and I understand that, and I'm not here to debate or argue that as well. We know that somewhere between 150 and 350 PAR works for most of the corals we keep. So right now, my tank was measuring at the front of the tank, the highest point in the tank was like 215, 230, and 205. Okay, pull this off of here. Now, the middle of the tank where I measured was different. So let me find you that. I think that's hidden on my desktop here. Let me look for my yesterday images. Okay, so this was... In this picture here, you can see the white numbers on the front, on the left side of the screen and on the right side of the screen. Those are the numbers near the glass. In the middle of the tank, I measured in 3 places, directly under each of the 3 lights. And I also measured straight down, about halfway down in the tank, where the aquascape stops, or starts, or whatever you want to call it, the top ridge. I measured under all 3 lights as well. And the average amount of PAR coming down under the surface of the water was 533. And down at the ridge level of the aquascape and the top of the sea bay, averaged around 280 PAR. Now, if you're wanting a higher number, the logical step would be either to turn up the intensity of the lights or lower the lights closer to the tank, that will get you more par. So if you're finding that you can't get enough in the tank for some reason, you need more number, you can. Now, the first thing you might say, well, Mark, why are your lights so low? When we installed the lights, and I say we because Terrence came over to help, when we installed the lights 5 months ago in a few days, we measured the par of the metal halides over the tank. And I would run my metal halides in 10K mode, which is 10,000 Kelvin, for an hour and a half each day. That's it, just an hour and a half of white light. And then I would switch to 20,000 Kelvin, which is bluer, and that ran for about 4.5, 5 hours a day. So I really had about 6 hours of metal halides on every single day. And it was staggered lighting where the light started here, and then after an hour, this one came on, and then after another hour, this one came on, and then, 6, 7 hours later, this one turned off, then this one turned off, and then finally this one turned off. So it kind of made it feel like the sun was moving across my reef. And I'd had it like that for a decade. I love that style, but when I installed the skies, I chose this time to not do that. Instead, I decided I would go ahead and just run lights during the daytime like a normal person, where they're all on and they're all off. And because I can ramp them up and down, unlike metal halides, they're either on or off, I can actually run them starting, the skies turn on at 11:30, and they run all the way until about 10:30 at night. But there's only 3 hours of the day where they're at peak intensity, which I've set to 60%. So literally I have 40% more light I can play with if I want to turn it up, and I might just do it. But why have I not turned it up? Because what we measured of the metal halides, we got the average of what amount of par was going in the tank each day, and we set the skies to that level, which was actually 50% of what the skies output could be. And after a few weeks, or a month I guess it was, I bumped it up to 60%, and I've just left it there ever since. Now in the meantime, a lot of things have happened in my tank, as many of you know, and I lost some corals because of the problem with my saltwater, and I got that corrected. But as I'm looking at the corals in the tank right now, I'm not seeing any kind of loss. I'm not seeing any kind of decay. I'm not seeing any bleach spots, from lighting. I'm not seeing corals that are too pale. Everything looks healthy. So I'm not so inclined to dump more light on top of it right now, but I might increase it some because I'm about to add more SPS corals. But for now, at least I have a baseline as of last night's measurement, and I can say, okay, I know at this point in my tank, this height, the number is around 240 par. Let me find, I think I have another image I can show you. This is my graph of the lighting over my tank each day, and what I circled is my period from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock, where my lights are running at 60%. The rest of the time it's lower. It's like 50, 45, 23, and then finally 0. So I have a certain amount of light in my tank each day, but I only have a specific amount of hours where it's really pounding down. Now I could probably raise that, or even in the dead center around the 16 o'clock hour, which would be like 4 o'clock, 4:30, I could bump that up to 70% and just have a little 45-minute window where it's really spiking into the tank. I don't know where my other doodle is that I made. It might be hiding in some folder somewhere. Now the back of the tank, I measured as well. And again, the numbers are about the same. At the sand bed, it was measuring around 145, 180, and 160. It's kind of interesting to me. It must be how the lights are located in their orientation front to back to the aquarium, because there seems to be more light on the sand in the back than there is in the front. And I can't attribute that to aquascaping because the rockscape is in the center of the aquarium. But it is a little stronger down there, and it could explain why I always have had corals growing down there, whether it was metal halides or the skies. Now, if you look at the midpoint of the tank, it seems to be at the 12-inch mark. It seems to be about 175 straight across, pretty much, all the same. And it is a little hard to measure certain spots, and like right at the tail of the yellow Tang, you'll see it says 170, and then you go down a little bit, it's 180. And at the bottom, it's still 180. It didn't have any shift, and that's because that's a very narrow corridor, and I think the light is bouncing off the glass and back into the reef and hitting the sensor, and that's why the number doesn't just go from highest number, lower, 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 all the way to the bottom. It actually, sometimes you'll see these kind of readings. Don't be too overly surprised. Now, back in the day when we were measuring par with metal halides, the reason we did it specifically is we wanted to know how much light we were getting from the bulbs that we had. And we would like to measure it again at 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and kind of see how much it had dropped off. And typically the bulbs that we had would last about 9 months to 12. Most of us pushed for 12 because they were expensive. And we would be able to say, hey, I'm actually getting 10% less light in my tank, even though I'm still paying for 400 watts. So it was a good reason to go ahead and spend whatever it cost you in bulbs. And I'm telling you, there was a lot of metal halide bulbs back then that you could purchase. There was stuff on eBay that was dirt cheap, that was horrible. I remember there was the Plus bulb, and it was, you know, like $20, $25. It was nothing. And it didn't last 3 days. I mean, you'd plug it in, it looked good for a second. It's like the one color spectrum you liked burned off instantly, and then you had this horrible, horrible yellow look in your tank. And, you know, people were like, oh, I bought the Plus, what a letdown. It's like, why would you buy that? We had brands like Ushio you could trust. There was Reef Lux that I loved. And a few others. Anyway, and the metal halide bulbs that we got were probably around $69 to $89 each. And you had to replace them every single year, which is one of the reasons why people have embraced LED lighting, because you just buy a light, you install it, and you're done. You can just keep going forever and ever and ever, and it seems like the lights will last you indefinitely. Well, mathematically, they won't. A typical light fixture for a reef tank, the way we run them, probably should last you 5 years. And once you've hit the 5-year mark, you really should be looking for a new set of lights. And some people are always upgrading. Like, I always get a new iPhone every single year, right? So I've always got the latest one. Mine is never more than 12 months old. But when it comes to lighting, you might be one of the people that likes to get a new light every few years, or you see some feature you like in another brand, so you jump to that ship and you try out that one for a while, and then you may, you know, kind of even cobble together different lights together to get the desired look over your aquarium. But for the most part, if you have an LED fixture over your tank right now that is 4 to 5 years old or older, it probably is definitely at the end of its lifespan. You should be looking to get something new to replace it to maintain the amount of light your tank needs. Now, how do you do that? You measure the PAR. So in the video last night, there was a fast forward video I put in there where I went through the entire tank with the plastic sensor holder and worked my way across. Then you saw my arm in the tank where I was holding the sensor in certain spots, and that's because I couldn't get the probe itself, the sensor itself, to point straight up toward the light because of the acrylic arm. It was in the way and it hits the light rack. So instead, I just had to hold it dead center and then lower it down to the water in the midpoint. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And if you need to, you can. There are other arms on the market that are kind of like that telescoping kind, like you used to buy antennas that would come out of your car and go up and up. And that has like a hinge at the bottom to where you can actually, you know, change the angle of how the sensor is sitting, so you can adjust. And that's kind of nice too. And that might be something you prefer to use yourself. When we are replacing our LED lighting with new lights, it's really good to know the PAR of the old lights as well as the new ones to make sure that you don't do damage to your existing reef, especially if you've had the same lights over your tank for 4 or 5 years and your tank is doing really well, and you're like, well, I need to upgrade, or I have a problem with the programming, I've got to replace it, or this one has failed, I need a new one over my tank. Then you are going to need to know what the PAR of the new light is to avoid bleaching out the area directly under that light fixture. So do keep that in mind. This is actually a really important thing. It's an important tool. Now, I believe the PAR meters run between $450, $550. And so a lot of times clubs would buy it and let their club members borrow it for a couple of weeks, and then the next person would borrow it, and it was shared among the club, and no one person had to spend all the money. Another option that I believe I saw online was that you could rent the PAR meter from BRS. I don't know how they do that exactly. I mean, obviously it takes some money, but I don't know what they do in case you destroy it. Like, how do they get the rest of their money? I don't know how that's set up. But being able to rent it for like $50 or something like that for something you're going to do once or twice a year, it's going to be more economical than actually buying and owning a meter. Myself, I like to own my toys. I don't like to have to go out and borrow or wait my turn necessarily. Just like when I have to build something in my house, I have the power tools. I don't go rent one or wait my turn to get one. I just need to do my project, and I like to have that tool for now and for the next time I have to do the same job twice. I wanted to show you this other graphic, but I don't know where it's hiding. Let me look in my documents folder. Maybe it got there. Yeah, so this one here the sensor was exactly under each of the 3 lights, and then I had the probe sticking up just, I keep calling it a probe, the sensor right above the water line. So here's your water line, and the water line is like here on both sides, and the sensor is just above it, so I'm getting direct light through air. That was my measurement. That's what gets me the 616, the 650, and the 664. So they're pretty much all the exact same intensity. And then I would bring it down just under the surface of the water where it's kind of moving a lot over the surface, and my average is around 530, 540, 550. One person asked in the video last night in the comments, why don't we measure the PAR in the ocean? And if we're losing so much light so rapidly in an aquarium, how on earth is any corals alive at 30 feet or 60 feet or 90 feet down? And I think it's because we're comparing man-made lighting to the sun, where the sun is pushing through. I don't even know the distance anymore. I used to know the stuff from science. Like, aren't we like 63 million miles from the sun? And yet somehow we're getting enough light to grow grass and trees and vegetation, and of course corals in the ocean. But would it be nice to measure PAR in the ocean, and can it be done? I'm sure it can, but I was trying to think of the logistics of actually doing that. The first thing you need is one of those sensors with a really long wire, because the receiver part that we have can't get wet. That part has to stay dry. And that's one of the reasons why on the back of it, they have a, let me turn this thing off because I left it on the screen, sorry. They have a mounting screw here to put on a tripod. So you can actually set it on your tripod at an angle, and then you can work your way through the tank, and you might have to move the tripod a little bit over as you go, but this thing stays dry and safe while you're doing all the wet work with the actual sensor. But if you were trying to measure it in the ocean, I mean, what do I have here? 6 feet of wire? I'm not gonna be able to go down very far to measure and see what we get, but we can definitely find out what it is at the surface and what it is at 12 inches and 24 inches. But after that, what do you do? So let's say you're a scuba diver and you're sent down with one of these sensors. Your buddy would be on a boat maybe, or or holding on to something, or just floating at the surface with their end, and they'd have to take notes of the numbers as you go down. Now, how do they know when you're at 15 feet, 30 feet, 45 feet? How do they know? How long are you going to be staying at that point before you start moving down further? How do they know now is the time to take the measurement? There is the ability to have this continuously measure, and then you can put in a USB wire in here somewhere, right here, to actually download the data. Maybe that's how the trick is done. But I was just trying to imagine if somebody was diving down, do they pull on the wire twice and say, okay, now I'm at this point, and you jot down the number, or you call it out to someone on a boat nearby, and then again go down deeper and then do it again? I don't know. It might be cool to do, but it's definitely different than comparing to LED lighting, or metal halide lighting, T5 lighting, plasma bulbs. Those all change, what's the different intensities. So yeah, that's how corals live in the ocean compared to what's happening in our aquariums. Fortunately, we're only trying to light usually about 30 inches or so worth of water. Some people have 4-foot tanks, 5-foot tanks. The public aquariums have tanks that are 8, 10 feet tall. They're trying to really push the light down as hard as they can to get the corals to grow down there. But if you'll notice, most of the public aquariums are going to have all the softies and the low light corals down low that fill in the area and don't demand a lot of light, but then they have all the SPS a lot of times way up at the top. And the only way you can really appreciate those corals, I mean, you can see them as a visitor looking through the glass, but when you do it behind the scenes and you're looking down, there's that huge plating Montipora, or there's this gorgeous Acropower that from the front you just didn't even appreciate because you're at the wrong angle. It's like being down on your knees looking up at your reef tank. You're never going to see what you see when you look at the reef from above, when you hop up on your stepladder or on your trusty walkboard. Okay. So really the question I have to ask myself is, do I want to increase the PAR in my tank now, or do I want to hold off a few more weeks? And I think I want to hold off a few more weeks. I mean, everything is literally doing really, really well in my tank with these numbers. So I don't see a reason to push the envelope yet. Now I am going to get some new corals soon that come from totally different sources, 3 sources specifically. In the case, Dwayne is sending me corals that are coming from his frag tanks, as far as I know, not from direct. Well, he did cut some things out of his reef and then move them to the frag tank. But at that point, they're under a different light because his main reef is under the sky light and the sky light fixtures. And then in his other tanks, I don't know what lighting he's using over those. So the coral has to adjust. Then it gets shipped to me, and then I put it in my tank, and I put it where I want to put it. And so it's going to have a different intensity. There is reason to have higher par for certain corals. Another person commented yesterday saying that the home wrecker is going to need more light. Dwayne also called me today and says, yeah, that one's probably going to need more intensity. But at the same time, this one coral down here that's so still bleached out, this chalice is still healing. He said if you were to go from that one being at 170 and suddenly it's at 250 or 280, that coral could continue to stay bleached. It may not color up properly, so it might be best to just hold off a little bit longer. And that's what I'm thinking. Just leave things alone, let the last of the residual issues completely clear up, and then I can look at increasing. Maybe I go up 10% and let it stay at 10% for like a whole month. And then maybe I go up another 5%. Maybe I'm at 75% then. Who knows? I don't know. But it's not something I feel that something has to change now they got this measurement. It just gave me some added insight or information to, dwell on and think about to see if there is a need for any kind of adjustment to be made. But if I had corals that were just constantly, the tips were burning off and the skin was peeling off and all that, I would say, oh, my lights are much, much too intense, or they're running much, much too long every single day. And a par meter would tell me how I'm doing, if that's an issue or not, or if that has nothing to do with anything. Also, if you're running carbon to clarify your water, the increased clarity of the water will allow more par to get through, which could actually kind of sunburn the corals. So you want to be aware of that and make sure that you are not polishing your water so well that your corals actually are getting too much light. Again, you can make adjustments. You can bring things down. You can move more into the blue spectrum. Or if there's not enough light, you can push more into the white spectrum, and you can run them a little bit longer per day at a higher intensity per day. There's a lot of flexibility when it comes to LED lighting, something that's really new to me when it comes to the reef tank. The other systems, I've always had LEDs, I mean, not always, but for a long time, I've had LEDs on the frag system. I've had LEDs on the anemone cube since I set it up. So it's not like I'm unaware of them. I had LEDs over my refugium back in 2011. Of course, it was just on off. I didn't dial them up or anything, and it was just, but they grew macroalgae, and I'm still growing the same algae a decade later. Okay, well, believe it or not, that is my whole topic for today. So I'm not going to just sit here and fill time just to waste yours. I'd much rather answer some of your questions. Be sure that you're typing @Mila's Reef so that way I see it. It's got to be part of the question. If you ask a question and then do @Mila's Reef, I may not see it because I'm filtering the comments with a special tool here on my side. So please do the whole question with the @Mila's Reef. Hey Branson, I haven't seen you in years. Branson's in Dubai. He runs a fish store over there. I got to visit. I still would like to take the time to work on that video one day. I think it might be interesting. Let me talk about this for a second. So Sammy31D says, light intensity? I just bumped my skies up to 80%. Seems like I'm losing some color. The water tests are excellent. Yeah, again, it could just be too much light too suddenly. I mean, think about when I switched from metal halides to LEDs. I read comments from people, good comments, negative comments. And one of the ones that was really loud, this one person was just like adamant, I've made a horrible decision. Just kept saying nothing beats metal halide and the LEDs are a terrible decision, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. The fact is there's tons of tanks under LEDs doing just fine, including Dwayne, who I look up to a lot. And he had the cheap black boxes from China that have no name on them, and he would just take them apart every single year, unsolder every single LED diode, and install a brand new one, or all of them, in that light, and they do the next light, and the next light, and the next light. And I can't remember how many lights he had over his tank. He probably had 6 or 7 of those things. And every year, he would literally tear it apart and break it down to the motherboard, to the circuit board, the green card, and then put brand new LEDs on it, put it all together, and put it back over his tank. Light after light after light. Every single year. You guys are buying one Radion and then you're mad it doesn't last you 6 years. You know, Kessel lights, you know, you have them for a certain long time, but you never take it apart and replace the LED inside there. No one thinks to do that. But Dwayne was buying dirt cheap lights. You know, they probably cost him $100 each. And then I don't know what it cost him to buy the LEDs. Let's say they were $4 each, and he had to replace, I don't know. I don't know the numbers on this, but let's pretend he had to change 24 on each light fixture. You know, he just did it every single year. That was his thing. He'd go in his workshop, he got his soldering iron out, and he redid it. And he would run all the channels at 100% every single day for years. And then eventually he switched to Radions, and then he eventually switched to the Sky. And I don't think he'll be taking that one apart and replacing LEDs, to be honest. But he also knew the measurements in his tank. He knew the par because he'd measure it. I actually asked him today, I said, have you measured par lately? And he says, no, I measured just before I installed the Skies. You know, I measured my Radions, and then I measured when the Skies were on, but I should measure again. And so in your case, if you're at 80% and your corals just aren't colorful, I mean, number one, I'm going to probably throw in your face, you need to raise the potassium. But it could just be it was too quick increasing your lighting. It isn't necessarily a need to go up higher. Again, it could just be it's too intense, or it's too intense for too long per day, making the corals a little bit pale. So we want to make sure that we're taking our time. So in my situation, like I said, we measured the par of the metal halides, and then we matched the Skies to that, so that way the reef had no idea what happened other than there was a better spread of light. A lot of shadows went away, and my tank was more evenly lit. And so I was very pleased with that. I was very pleased with the look. I was very pleased to be able to change, you know, just to a dark blue if I wanted to, or I could switch to very white. I mean, right now, this is actually my normal light cycle. I normally change it for you guys for the stream so it doesn't look so crazy blue and purple. So this is what it usually would look for you. So you see I changed it to a white light for the stream so you can actually see the corals and identify things. But it's kind of hideous to the eye. And then if I want to have like late night lighting, or if I want to take pictures of my tank, I can just turn this one on, and that kind of filters out a little bit and adds a little bit more white, which works really well with the iPhone. If I was trying to convince you all to buy my corals, I could just switch to this crazy blue, which now you can't see anything in the background. It kind of looks like every blue tank you ever see in the background of a video. And then I also have all the lights at 100%. So that actually is not a bad look to the natural eye. It looks good and it's very intense, but I haven't measured the par when it's all at 100%. I'd have to remeasure to find out what those numbers even are. And then Dwayne gave me a copy of his evening code where his tank is sort of blue, but not crazy blue, and it's dimmed down so it's relaxing while he's watching TV, which is that look right there. But like I said, I just left it alone today. I just left it at whatever it is. So you're getting the real deal right now. This is part of my normal programming. And that was the other thing. I had to measure that par yesterday between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock, because if I waited until like 8 o'clock and then told my light just be at a higher intensity, it wouldn't have been the exact spectrum that I've programmed in between 3 and 6. And I'd have to go figure out, well, what were my sliders at between 3 and 6 and correct them all, then raise the intensity. It's like, just easier to measure between that 3-hour window, and that's what I did. Okay. I did say I'd answer some questions, so let me go find one. Q-Ball says, does Acropower work as a carbon source? I've noticed that my nitrate has started to drop after dosing. I don't think so. It's an amino acid. I don't think it could be considered a carbon dose. And Luca, yeah, you can ask here, or you can ask in Club Miller's Reef. It's whatever you like to do. I was looking at that article that I linked in this video in the description. It's there right now. You can click on it. That article, I was looking at some of my old pictures of my old corals and the measurements, and I had some SPS corals at like 578 and and way up in the 500s. And I had a lot of stuff down in the 200s as well. So these 200s that I measured yesterday, and 220s and 230s and 175s, they all felt very normal to me. It wasn't like, oh, wow, that's really low. I mean, actually, it was kind of like, that's what I'm used to seeing. And so I wasn't surprised at all. Drum Clock says, don't the dive watches tell you the depth? Yes. But if you're at a certain depth on your dive watch, how does the guy at the surface that's marking down the numbers know you're at your depth? That's my point. I was trying to think how you could communicate, because usually when it comes to scuba diving, it's kind of a solo mission. You don't have the ability to communicate with others unless you wear a full face mask that has a microphone built in, where a person at the boat could listen to you talk. I mean, that's always in the movies. They're all communicating, but most guys don't have that set up. And so I was trying to picture in my mind how they would do it. Now, if you could take an entire meter with its housing and somehow put it in a waterproof case that's pressurized so it won't let water in, then maybe you could look at the sensor and look at the gauge and say, oh, okay, and somehow mentally tell yourself, or you have to take out that little chalkboard they always have down there with a wax pencil, and you write down your different numbers at the different depths. It could be a fun thing to do. I don't know. I don't know anyone that's done it. Dana Riddle might have done some of this. He's done a lot of testing of PAR in the waters of Hawaii. But I don't know necessarily how they're measuring PAR at those depths in the real ocean. Mahmoud says, what's the best way to switch from Kalkwasser to Randy's 2-part? I exceeded my evaporation rate with Kalk. Recommended dose on the reef chemistry calculator isn't enough, and my alkalinity keeps dropping. Actually, it's a pretty simple transition. You just stop using Kalkwasser and you start dosing 2-part. It's not like you have to bleed from one over to the other, and you would just start topping off with RODI water like normal, and then just add the elements you need to maintain alkaline calcium at the right level. You may start off at first kind of, your numbers may bounce around a little bit as you're trying to dial it in, but hopefully within, if you're doing daily tests of your water, you should be able to get those numbers pretty close to where they belong within about 7 to 14 days. But it's actually not that hard to do. And though once the tank is at the proper levels, conceivably you should be able to use Kalkwasser to maintain them there. But like you said, you're at the point now where you've exceeded everything and Kalkwasser doesn't keep up, and you can't possibly put in enough. Ah, such a good comment right here. Nicolaj says, and some corals might not be light dependent because there's so much food constantly available in the ocean. That's a true, very true point. I love that. Hey Terry, thank you very much. Right now there's some guys out there working around the new building. There's some guys out there working on the building right now, fixing the irrigation because the sprinklers got all destroyed during the concrete work. And so they are literally making everything perfect to work with and around that building. And there was 3 branches or 3 different zones where the pipes were just destroyed by the trench machine. And so they dug and they found one, and they said, well, we don't really know where the other 2 are. And I said, well, I put them in myself 20 years ago. There's a really good chance they're exactly in that same spot. So they dug a little deeper and found all 3 pipes, which is good. So they can get all that figured out. And they're putting new sprinkler heads here, there, and everywhere to get me really good coverage, and as well as keep water around the foundation so that building will stay very stable. David says, will the correct PAR for too long kill the corals? Well, it really comes down to how long can a coral be lit? What is considered normal? And God, so many people like to say, hey, in the ocean, they have 12 hours of light, but that's so not realistic. They are not getting 12 hours of pure, intense light. They get sunrise like we get sunrise, and light is coming in dimly, and as it moves up, they get more light, and at the peak of the day, they're getting a ton of light, and then it's already bleeding off some, and then it bleeds off more, and then finally it's down. So comparing it in that direction it's not accurate. It's not a good analogy. And that's why I tell people you're much better off trying to have a window that has the right intensity, and then have ramp up and ramp down at the ends of the light cycle for your personal enjoyment, but not for growth. I would not want to light a tank for 12 hours a day to grow corals. I would want to light a tank for 7 or 8 hours a day for growth, Everything else is bonus time, just time to look at the tank and say, oh, it's so pretty. Mike says, what do you keep your nitrates at? Currently, they're about 10, maybe even a little bit lower. And in my frag system, they are lower. They're less than 5. Flooded Aquatics says, on my XR30s, Mobius is constantly, every 2 weeks, resetting and putting my lights at the default 50% intensity, which is a problem because my set point is 30%. Anyone know of a fix? I'm ready to throw 2400. I think what you should probably do is contact Ecotech and ask them what to do, because they'll probably help you fix whatever's wrong. I haven't noticed that with any of my lights, and I've got some lights on Mobius as well, and they're just running my set schedule, and they just do it day in and day out. I haven't seen any kind of change whatsoever. So if you are finding that yours is doing something goofy, they may actually reset your lights to factory specs and then reprogram again, and then you'll probably be good to go. Linton says, I have a 60-gallon cube, 3/4 inch acrylic. Does it need a top brace? I cut off the top brace while changing the all-in-one layout to a ghost overflow. Well, yes, I would definitely say that, because acrylic it's more bendy than glass. Glass is more rigid. So that's why when you see so many rimless tanks, they're made of glass. And there's some huge rimless tanks that make me nervous, but they seem to hold a nice straight line when you look down the length of it, where acrylic will bow outward at the center. So if you have a 24 by 24 cube and you fill it with water, you'll see that the walls at the midpoints are going to deflect out and the front and back's going to deflect. It could bend out as much as 3/4 of an inch, possibly a full inch. And that is a lot to ask those 4 seams to hold the tank together for the rest of its life. Can it work? Yes. Will it work long term? Maybe. But will it look good? Probably not. Even my system in there, my frag system that is 48 inches long, with a 3-inch rim all the way around it, it is bending out at the center point about 1/2 inch. It just does. Acrylic is more bendy. So I would definitely say a top piece. I would like to see a solid top piece with a hole cut out in the center is what I would recommend for your tank. Brian says, I started dosing 3-part about 3 months ago and the sand is getting hard. What could be causing this? I believe when sand gets solid like that, it's an alkalinity reaction in the sand bed. I do need to tell you this, that whatever has turned hard, don't try to break it up. Because I found when you try to break it up to like reuse that sand, something bad happens in your tank. I'm not sure exactly what chemically is happening, but I found that the smartest thing you can do whenever you have any part of your sand bed turned hard to rock, just take that piece out and throw it away. It's gone, it's done. Now, it's not something that happens all the time, so some event has occurred, because it happened in my frag tank once, it never happened again. And I know other people it happens rarely, but when it does, it just does. And so you just remove that bad spot and then you're good to go, and it shouldn't happen anymore. You want to make sure that whatever you're dosing, that it's at different times of day. So like if you dose alkalinity, you do that early in the morning, and you want to do it in an area of really high flow. You don't want just trickling into the corner of your sump or in the back of the tank. You need to go in an area where it's just being blown across into the reef. That's very important. And then you can do your calcium later in the day. You can do magnesium in the middle of the night, but don't have them all happening around the same time. I even noticed in the Versa program, Versa or Camor, one of the two, I think it was Camor, it actually has a built-in setting that if you have multiple Camor pumps running and you program the first one and you want the other ones to do stuff too, it will literally make the other one wait 5 minutes before it starts dosing. And I think that's kind of nice. So instead of you telling this one do it at 1 o'clock and this one doing it at 1:15 and this one do it at 2:30, it just knows to never overlap them at the same time through its programming. And I think that's a really cool thing. David says, how would you deal with cyanobacteria? I would treat the tank to get rid of it. I did that in my own tank not too long ago. I had some hints of it before it really got bad, and I went ahead and treated the tank, and a couple days later it was gone. So it's, you know, I like ChemiClean or I like Red Cyano RX. I sell Red Cyano RX on my website if you want to buy it from me. And I show exactly how to use it on my website. I explain my way of dosing the tank to get rid of cyanobacteria. And it's an easy thing to copy. The only downside is when you treat the tank to kill cyanobacteria, your protein skimmer overflows like crazy. And so you're going to need to deal with that afterwards. And the solution is a huge water change, huge, like at least 25%. And then let the skimmer overflow as much as it wants when you turn it back on. You know, adjust it down as low as you possibly can so it's exporting as little as possible, but it's still going to volcano into the cup. Let that drain into a nearby bucket. And as much as drains out, just put more salt water in your system to replace what you're losing. So if that skimmer drains 5 gallons of watery, clear liquid, you put 5 gallons of salt water in there to replace it. And once the skimmer settles down, you're back to business. And what I tell people is if you just do that, the day, you know, you've treated your tank to kill the cyano, now it's gone, now you turn your protein skimmer, people will say, oh, I couldn't turn on my skimmer for weeks after that. It just kept overflowing for weeks. It was such a problem. I was a month later, I still can't use my skimmer. I don't know what to do. If you literally do what I said and let the skimmer just drain, 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 you can solve it in like 6 hours flat, and now your skimmer's back to normal. And there's none of this weeks stuff. And when I did my big cyano kill on my tank, I changed 150 gallons when the treatment was over. And then the skimmer drained 50 more gallons out of my system. So I ended up changing 200 gallons of water in my tank. But I solved the skimmer overflowing in 2.5 hours. So it doesn't have to be a big ordeal. It's just something, that's the one downside of treating for cyano is the protein skimmer you have to deal with cleanup afterwards. Mahmoud, if it's not enough, you just have to dose more. He was saying, I'm using what the calculator says. It says I need this much. You're going to need to find the right amount and dose that. And the calculator is just a guideline. It's not an absolute, this is what you got to do. I will tell you, and the other thing is it dosing, you know, when you're selecting the stuff in the calculator, are you selecting the correct product? Because sometimes you just have to kind of guess. Like, well, they don't list magnesium pronto, for example, but they have anhydrous magnesium sulfate, or they have anhydrous magnesium chloride, so I'm going to pick that one. And for example, there was a time where, yeah, my saltwater vat, the alkalinity was really low. I think it measured 6.5, and I needed it to be 10. And so it said you're going to need 9 teaspoons of soda ash. And so I mixed up 6 teaspoons, and I added that quietly into the container, just slowly. And then when it was all mixed in there, I waited about 20 minutes and I measured, and it wasn't there yet. So I put in the last 3, and I let it mix, and I waited and I measured, and it was exactly right. I was like, wow, calculator was correct. So if your calculations are not dead correct, there could be reasons why it's not right. It could be you made a mistake with it, what you're entering. It could be you don't know your true water volume of your system, and you took a guess and it's not right, or whatever it is. I mean, you might be over-guessing it. For example, let's say you have a 100-gallon tank and you have a 50-gallon sump. And so you put in the calculator, I have a 150-gallon system. It's not true. Your 100-gallon tank might hold 82 gallons of water, and your 50-gallon sump might have 12 gallons of water. So usually what I tell people is, like, whatever your tank is plus your sump, if you want to account for displacement of sand and rock, usually just ignore the sump. So if you say you have a 100-gallon tank, you probably have a 100-gallon total liquid volume, maybe because of the sump's water. But that's just a ballpark guesstimate. That's not dead accurate. There are ways to determine exactly how much water's in your tank, and it's going to take some math, some measuring, and some verification by draining out a certain amount of water and seeing what really comes out. Or when you're filling it up, you can actually measure how much you're putting in the tank, and you can say, oh, like this one behind me, it's a 400-gallon tank, but internally it doesn't hold anywhere near 400 gallons. And so this tank, plus the huge sump I have underneath, plus the anemone cube, I only have 450 gallons of liquid volume. And when I change 200 gallons, actually, when I change, I think if I drain the water down to the top of the vortex, or maybe the top of that vortex. I think that's 100 gallons. And so drain this all the way down to the sand bed would not be like 350 gallons. It's not. It just isn't. Because the outside measurement, they measure the glass. They may even measure the plastic trim on the tank and say that, that's the dimensions. Those dimensions add up to a 400-gallon aquarium. But internally, the glass is 3/4 inch thick. So you're losing the ends. The bottom panel of glass is not flat on the wooden platform. It's actually raised up because it's sitting in the plastic trim. And then you don't fill the tank to the brim. You fill it up to the top, which is below the plastic trim. So you've lost a couple of inches on top as well. So it could be that your math calculations are off a little bit. But if the calculator is saying to use this much and you're using that much and you're not getting the desired amount, then what you do is you put in what you're getting now, redo the calculations, and it should say what little bit is missing, and you should be able to figure out exactly what you do need. Foreign Reefer says, I just finished building a 40-gallon breeder anemone tank. Any light suggestions that don't emit heat? Because the tank would be in the stand and it shouldn't be ridiculously expensive. Thanks. Well, that Reef Phi light seems to be affordable. That's one of many. SB Reefs had a light fixture as well that people seem to like. But most LED lights need to have ventilation because the heat coming off of the LEDs, off the heat sink, has to go somewhere. If any kind of light, you're converting electricity into wattage, there's going to be a conversion of heat, and heat has to go somewhere. It has to dissipate. It has to be vented out. You could probably put holes on your cabinetry that this tank is built into and bring in fresh air from the room from both sides. Literally push room air into the stand and let it force out the air wherever it can get out. I know some people want to put one fan blowing in and one fan blowing out, and I don't recommend that. It's much better to push the cool air-conditioned room air in and let the hot air force its way out through wherever it goes out, whether it goes through the cracks of the doors or behind the aquarium stand, out the back of the canopy, or if you had slits on the top of the canopy where the heat can go out through convection, that's helpful as well. But it's, there's not very many light fixtures out there that aren't going to put out some kind of heat that will produce enough light to keep anemones happy. Anemones. I have the worst time with that word. Linda says, have you tried to recharge the Brightwell's Nitrate R yet? It seems to be lasting as well. No, I haven't, because I don't know what I need to use, and I don't know how I'm supposed to keep that stuff from floating away down the drain. Tell me what you're using. I'm going to bug MetroCat, who is supposed to tell me what to do. But I think I need to buy some pantyhose to put those in, so as I do the recharging, I can. But, I used it. My nitrates came down. I removed it, but I still have it sitting in a bucket over there, and it needs some attention. So I need to know how I'm going to recharge it. I need to know how to store it for now. And then I need to know, how I probably will put it back on in a smaller reactor with less amount just to maintain my low number, because I do want to start adding some fish. Thanks, Odile. That was very nice of you to say that. He said, get what Mark sells. I found that he sells works best. I used the other stuff talked about, but he solved my problems that I'd been fighting for months. Queen City Reef says, are you having any regrets going from halides to LEDs? Not even slightly. I was in my brain when I made the switch and I looked at my tank, I was thinking I should have done this sooner. But the lights didn't exist sooner, so technically I did it right on schedule. But I really did like the look, and I was really sure I was going to hate it. But no, I have zero regrets. It's great. My tank temperatures come down a full degree on a daily basis. Matter of fact, it's down enough that my heaters are on a little bit more than I expect. But I keep the house so nice and comfortably cool, it's my own fault. So when I start working in the workshop out there, I'll probably keep that workshop cooler than I keep the house, because I am just like going in here. And so I don't know if you know this about me, guys, but I hate to sweat. I mean, I just can't stand it. I don't like going to the gym to sweat. I don't like sweating when I have to walk jack. I just don't like it. And so I prefer not to, and I keep the house as ridiculously cold as I can so that I can be comfortable. Even when I'm moving 100 miles a minute, I don't sweat. It's nice. And, you know, I'm in my car. I have the air conditioner running full tilt. I just love cold air on me, and I don't want to feel moist. I just don't like it. So odds are that building out there will be nice and cool throughout all the summer months. And I know there'll be a couple of months where I won't need much. And then there will be some months where I'll have to have heat on in there a little bit to fight the chill. But maybe the house temperature will be up a little bit warmer now because there won't be the need to work in here. And once that's the situation, maybe the heaters won't come on as much because the house will be at a more logical level, like 73, 74 instead of 69 to 71. Sammy says, I'm pretty sure low magnesium is what lets cyano creep in. You know what? That's not true. Cyanobacteria is not dependent on a chemistry change in your aquarium. Cyanobacteria exists in everything. I was just reading an article, I think in Coral Magazine, and it was talking about cyanobacteria inside the coral itself, inside its, oh, you know what it was? It wasn't Coral Magazine. It's that brand new publication that came from Australia, the Coral ID workshop. And I bought the books, not cheap, by the way. And I was going through there, and it was talking about what was inside the polyps, what was inside the sclerites, and inside the, all these terms I never use. And it was talking about where it was present. I was like, you know, I mean, I know it's everywhere, and I know it's in fresh water, salt water, brackish water. I know that it's been found, you know, 2 miles deep in the Earth's crust. They found a whole patch of cyanobacteria, which is just amazing to me. But when it blooms, when we see it just growing in abundance and we have this red blanket or green blanket or blue blanket, that's when we hate it, right? And we want it gone. But it's not, oh, your magnesium was low or your magnesium was high and that's why cyano appeared. It appeared because it would just finally hit a tipping point for whatever reason. Sometimes cyano just happens like seasonal. It's just a thing. Sometimes it happens because of where the sun is, you know, hitting the room. Normally it comes at one path, but now the seasons have changed. The time of year comes at a different angle and hits the tank a certain way, and you just have this bloom. But I don't think your magnesium level changing would make cyano suddenly bloom and become something ugly. I don't know what you're asking about, Aquaballs. Use the Polyp Lab what? I don't know. Ask me which product it is, and then I can answer your question. And then Jerry says, does your whitetail Tang still have the face injury? Yes, but I'm kind of hoping, she's over there, I'm kind of hoping now that the nitrates are low that it will fill in again. I've seen other fish in the past that had really bad, you know, markings on their faces do better when the water got much, much better. And my nitrates are now where they belong. It's fantastic. I mean, I love it. And I'm hoping that that was the cause and that she will now improve. Where'd she go again? Anyway, she's gone. But I do hope that it will get better. And I'm also trying to improve or increase how much nori I put in the tank, because I want to make sure that the fish are getting plenty of vegetation, especially that coal. And of course Spock too. She could be a little thicker, and I've been putting nori like twice a week. I need to step that up. And with my water so perfect, I can put whatever I want in there and mess it all up again. Queen City Reef says, do you have any humidity issues with that big of a tank and water volume? If so, how do you resolve it? I run a dehumidifier in this room every single night while I'm asleep. I turn it on somewhere around midnight, and I usually turn it off around 10 a.m. And there are times of the year when it will run until it just pulls out whatever it needs to, and it turns itself off. Because, you know, you can set it to pull down to a certain humidity level. And I think mine is set to like 45 or something. Never gets there. But there are certain times a year where it will cycle on and off. I think it's winter, to be honest, where it'll cycle on and off, and it might take 3 weeks for it to actually pull out enough water to where the big pan in the bottom can be drained. But during the summer months, Texas is very humid, and almost have to empty it twice a day. You know, if I were to run it 24 hours, it could pull out humidity all day and then pull out humidity all night. But I don't like running it all the time because number one, it's noisy, it's loud. And secondarily, it's adding heat to the room while it's running. So having it run at night while I'm asleep in bed, I don't feel the warmth, I don't hear the sound, and in the morning I just dump out the water. And I've been doing that now for a while, and it's helping protect my home from damage. Specifically like the vents for the air conditioner on the ceiling, and the front of my refrigerator, which is a stainless steel fridge, was rusting. And running a dehumidifier has solved that problem and made it where it doesn't happen anymore. But there's still certain parts of my home where humidity damage does occur. The intake vent that goes into the AC system, the main system, that thing just gets disgusting. I feel like I have to buy a new one every year because they're made of metal, and apparently it's cheap metal with very thin paint. I've been tempted to just get a piece of acrylic on my CNC machine and literally make a cover plate with slits and just screw on a plastic one I can wipe off with a sponge that will never rust again. And who knows, I might do it this winter. I might just go ahead and just make myself a couple and just call it a day. Just get some white acrylic and just do that. And that way it's kind of invisible on the wall. But that is how I combat it. I absolutely feel there's a need. I also have a vent fan in the fish room that runs 24 hours a day, all year long. The only reason it might be off temporarily is either the fan burned up or the weather is so cold outside that I shut it off to not take out the heat out of the home. So, I mean, there's been times, you know, like when temperature's down in the teens here, you know, it might be 12 or 16, and that would be a good time to turn off the vent fan. There's no reason to suck out the warmth out of the home into that kind of weather. Linda says that I just need to use salt to recharge it. I'll make MetroCat tell me. Yes, that's true. I hate to sweat and I hate fresh air. Can clownfish eat pumpkin? Some fish will eat pumpkin. Joe Aiello at the 20,000 gallon reef tank in Long Island will drop an entire pumpkin in there and all the tangs will chew on it. And it's pretty fun to watch. Oh, okay. No, I have not tried this product you're talking about if it raises calcium and magnesium. I run a calcium reactor, and because it runs all the time, my alkaline and calcium are always taken care of. I never have to really think about them. I'm using limiter code on my Apex Fusion now to slow the calcium reactor down when the alkalinity gets to a certain point. And I set it to be at 9.5, so if it gets above 9.5, it slows my calcium reactor down. And I had to double check the code because it wasn't quite working, but like right now my tank is at 9.6. So it's right there. If it dips down a little bit under that 9.5, it'll turn on. And what it turns on is the CO2. And then that allows the melting point to go down in the calcium reactor, which creates the effluent, which gives me the alkalinity that trickles into my tank. By the way, interesting fun fact. So I dose 80 milliliters of water per minute from the calcium reactor into my tank. And I had no idea how much that actually was in real numbers, because it's milliliters, that's metric. That means we don't care, right? So I did a thing here. Actually, I took a picture of it. Is this it? I can't find it. It's hiding behind everything. Dang it. Hang on. All right. Yeah, this is it. So I took this picture for you guys. I'll put it right here next to me. So 80 milliliters a minute is 115,200 milliliters per day. And I said, well, how much is that in gallons? And it comes out to 30.43 gallons of effluent goes through my calcium reactor or comes out of my calcium reactor every single day into my reef tank. So 30.43 gallons of liquid water going into the calcium reactor, through the media, melting it down, turning into alkalinity, and draining back into the system is what's happening every single day. It's kind of a cool number, right? And so that comes out to like 1.23 gallons per hour is what's coming out of my calcium reactor. And I didn't even know that until today. I've never thought about the gallons per hour. I just knew I want a trickle coming out of the tubing, and that trickle adds up to 30.43 gallons a day. Told you, fun fact. Linton says, my NASA Tang only eats nori. Is that normal? I'd say it's not normal. I mean, it's good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm surprised it doesn't want to try other foods. So you've tried flake food, you've tried pellet food, you've tried frozen Rod's food, frozen Larry's food, frozen everything, and it won't touch anything but nori? That's kind of surprising. My Tang will eat Valonia right off of a coral I'm holding in my hand. She'll eat whatever algae she can get off the rock, whatever's left. She will eat nori, she will eat krill, she will eat PE mysis, lots of different stuff. And she's not very picky. She'll eat live rock enhanced as it's blowing through the water column. And it's nice to meet you, George. Thank you for telling me your name. Odile says, have you ever thought about putting a hose to your dehumidifier so then you can send that to a drain? I haven't. I mean, I have, but I haven't. Right now it's just sitting here in the kitchen area, which is the kitchen living room. I could probably put it in the fish room and put it into the floor drain and let it trickle out there and run down my driveway for the rest of my life. It's it's no big deal to dump it out once in a while. I don't have like a floor drain in my house. Most people don't. Hello, Brad. You're camping right now and you're watching a live stream. You should be enjoying nature. Jerry says, can I run my reef with a glass top to prevent saltwater rust? Saltwater waste? Saltwater creep? We normally don't put glass tops in our aquariums for a reason, because we're trying to not stop oxygen exchange, so we like open tops. But a lot of people put a screen on top to keep fish from jumping out. And I might end up doing that myself with my reef. I don't, but I might do it this year, just because. It would be smart, because I do want to buy some new fish that won't know my reef like these fish. These fish know, stay in the water if you want to live, right? But the new ones might not know. So I'm thinking about maybe possibly getting screen tops. I usually don't put screen tops because I don't like things in my way, but I'm not really reaching in the tank that much to where they're totally in my way. So I don't know. I do think that if I put a screen top, I got to figure out how to deal with it around the two pieces of PVC pipe coming in that send the water into the tank. So we'll see about that. Ooh, my thing is blinking at me that it's got low batteries. I caught it before you caught it. Let me go ahead and switch these out right now. I'm gonna put myself on mute for a second. Testing, testing. Hey, that seems to work. Okay, cool. I caught it before it was too late. And I get phone calls from Andrea saying, we can't hear you. Terry says, I was thinking about doing an acrylic lid for my Nuvo 20 to lower evaporation. Evaporation is not a bad thing. It's actually natural cooling of your tank, and I see no reason to ever care about evaporation as long as you have an auto top off to replace the water that's being lost. So I'd rather see you put a top-off system on that tank than to see you put an acrylic lid. And to be honest, I don't even want you to have an acrylic lid. If you want to have a lid, if you're married to the idea, then get it out of polycarbonate, because polycarbonate stays straight and true, where acrylic will bow, and then it'll look like a potato chip, and you're going to have to flip it over, and then it'll bow the other way, and you'll have to flip over your potato chip for the rest of your life. Plus, when you put something like that on the top of the tank, what happens is you get condensation. The condensation does drip water back into the tank, but it gets salt crystals on there, and it obscures the the clarity, and it inhibits the light from getting through. And the more salty it looks, the more gray it is, the less light getting through. It's getting more and more diffused, and you're losing the light you're paying for that's hanging above the tank. So it'd be better not to do that. George says, I got into saltwater 4 months ago. I'm trying to learn. I can't have anything over 3 gallons right now. All my tanks are nanos. They're almost picos. So far, I set up 4 saltwater tanks, 1 tank a month. And I have a 55-gallon freshwater. Oh, okay. They're 30-gallon tanks. All right, not 3 gallons. I was like, 3 gallons? That's nothing. Literally, my tank evaporates more than that per day. Enjoy the hobby. I mean, that's all I can tell you. If you want to have a lot of tanks in your room, you can. Freshwater people do that. They get like a bunch of tanks. For me, I'm all about having 1 really nice tank, or maybe 2. But to have a whole bunch of them just sounds like a lot of work. God, a lot of people have said, are you going to grow corals in the workshop? Are you going to put an aquarium out there? I'm like, no, that is work. I want to walk out the door and go work every single day, and then come in here and enjoy my reef. I definitely do not want to have another aquarium out there I have to worry about, and literally worry about, because that's what it'll be. Is the power still on in there? Is there battery backup in there? Is the dust from my work getting in the tank? Do I have to test water? Yes, there's a tank that hasn't been tested. I mean, it's one more thing to keep clean. It's one more thing to maintain all the equipment on. I do not want another tank out there. I want to just enjoy my reef. I want to enjoy my home. I want my home to feel like a home, and I want to go to work out there. That's what I want. And I hope by the end of October to be in there. That would be awesome. It's 4 weeks. That might be a little fast, but it would be awesome to be ready to start working in there November 1st. That would be really nice. Brandon says, my nitrates have been high and I've been doing 60 to 80% water changes and it's still high. What can I do? Okay, so number 1, you must be new to my channel because I've had high nitrate forever. I finally got them down. So I am your person. You are my people. And don't feel bad, don't feel guilty. First thing you want to do is verify that your nitrate reading is correct. And you can do that by going to your fish store with a water sample and having them do the test just to double check. Because if you're getting this high reading and it's just a faulty kit and you're so worried about something when really it's been low the whole time, would be a lot of wasted effort, right? So let's double check that your number really is high. And if it is 60 or if it is 80 or whatever it is, you can bring it down. Now, what causes nitrate in a saltwater environment oftentimes is a lack of water changes, or there's some kind of media being used like bioballs, bio wheels, bio bale. Anything with the word bio in it usually means I'm going to grow you nitrate because it's converting the ammonia into nitrate really rapidly. And so like a wet dry sump creates nitrate nonstop. And no matter how much water you change, you'll never be able to outcompete the wet dry. So if that's under your tank, that thing needs to go. If you did have if you had bio balls, I would then say remove 25% each week. Just quietly take out 25%, and then after 1 month, there's just none in your system. Don't rip out all 100% at once, okay? A lot of people back in the day had wet dries because they brought that from their freshwater world into saltwater, and it's not good for our tanks. It's not good for our corals, so we don't do that. But my own reef, I had been trying to get nitrates down for years. And finally this year I did a big reef reset on my tank, and that's why it looks half empty, because I removed a lot of big corals and then I started to really clean the sand bed. And I gravel vacked the sand bed, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, and now my nitrates are measuring around 10 week after week after week. And I'm actually very happy with that number. I don't need it to be 2 or 3 or some crazy low number. Anything under 10 is fine. Usually anything under 20 suffices for most simple reef systems. And then as you're trying to go into some crazy high-end stuff, you may need to really dial that in lower. But for most hobbyists, 20 and below should be a good number. But if you're changing a lot of water, you're not seeing changes, I would start to wonder if the test kit is correct. I'd also want to check your brand new salt water that you're using to change with and make sure that it's measuring 0 nitrate. Because really, if you do a 50% water change on a system with brand new salt water that's got no nitrate in it, your nitrate in the system should cut in half. So if you have a 100-gallon tank with 100 nitrate and you change 50 gallons, it should be 50 nitrate the next day. And then if you changed another 50 gallons, you should be 25 nitrate. And you change another 50 gallons, you should be 12.5 nitrate. I mean, it's 3 water changes should do it. But they'd have to be close together. If you do 80% water change once a month, you may not, I mean, it should definitely make a difference, but you won't be winning the battle. Ruben says, big fan from Connecticut. I cycled my 125-gallon aquarium. I put in Zoas, a purple Tang, and my Nasso. My question is, how long can I put my calcium reactor on, or is it too early? You need to run the calcium reactor when you have something using the calcium and the alkalinity up in your system. Right now you have Zoas in there and a couple of Nasso, or a couple of Tangs. I don't think you have a need for a calcium reactor yet. But when you start to really fill it in with some corals, that would be a good time. If you're having to dose 2-part, that's when you're ready for a calcium reactor. If you're not having to dose anything right now to maintain numbers, you probably don't need it yet. Oh, you know what, Linton? You should try some banana. NASA will not eat any meaty foods. Only other thing she'll eat is hair algae, which I grow. Other tangs eat everything. It's funny that your NASA is being that way, but mine loves banana. And you can just take the tip of one banana, break it off, and just hold it in the water, and the NASA may come up and eat it right out of your hand. Also, you can blanch broccoli, which means you would take the broccoli and you put it in boiling water for 15 seconds. That's just enough to kill off any parasites, and then you can put that very crisp broccoli in your tank, and the NASA could eat it. Over in Europe, they like to feed the tangs what we call butter lettuce. Sometimes here in the US, people use romaine lettuce. But those you also want to clean really good first before you put them in the tank. Make sure there's no pesticides on them. And you can put that type of lettuce in your tank if you're trying to do different vegetations besides nori. What? George has 55 freshwater tanks in his garage? Dude, why do you even have time to watch a live stream? 55 aquariums? That's like 54 too many. Actually, in my eyes, that's 55 too many. That's insane. Marcus says, I just paid today for some more safety stuff. Thanks in advance. I'll ship it out on Monday. NSB says, besides a fan, what's the best way to speed up evaporation? A fan is really the way to do it. I don't know that there's another technique that I can think of. A cooling fan does it. Terry says, we better get some good vids of you setting up the new building. Let me know if you need any help. I'm only 5 hours drive away. That's awesome. Yeah, so the next step is going to be some electrical, some insulation. I'd like to get the AC unit on there with an AC heater. And I also need to figure out how I'm going to do the sheetrock. I've been trying to learn what are the options to connecting sheetrock inside a motor building, because there aren't studs like every 2 feet or every 16 inches or anything. It's like really far apart metal pipe. So I'm debating how to handle it. I might go out there with a big roll of masking tape and try to map out everything on the concrete floor just to kind of see, because I have a certain idea in my head that I really would like to do, but it might rob me of space and make it less good. So I'm trying to decide how I want to handle it. But yeah, I definitely want to share with you guys what I'm doing in the building as things start happening. Right now, they're just working on the ground, on the dirt outside to make sure the sprinklers are working right. David says, are you saying you don't use any biomedia? No, I don't think I have any biomedia in my system at all at this point. I have a calcium reactor, which is not that. I mean, it's alkaline calcium. I have a protein skimmer. I have a refugium, which is macroalgae just sitting on top of some reborn calcium reactor media. And I have an algae turf scrubber, which is just growing algae on a sheet of plastic that is being lit with lights from both sides that I clean out, I don't know, every 10 days or so. But there's no filter socks, there's no roller mat, there's no sponges, there's no, I mean, then I have live rock, of course, and I have a deep sand bed. But no, I don't have any ceramic media, I don't have any bricks, I don't have any of that stuff. Ah, yes, bioballs. That is, okay, if that's what you have, get rid of those. So don't get rid of them all at once, like I said before. The rule of thumb is take out 25% each week, you know, and you can clean your sump as you're going, like get detritus out of there and stuff. And once those are gone and you're doing a large water change, like I said, a 50% water change will cut them in half and you'll get those numbers down and down. But do double check, make sure that you're getting accurate reading from your nitrate test kit. It could be a bad kit. I bought a brand new kit from the fish store down the street from me and it showed I had no nitrate and I knew that was a big fat lie. And I told him, I was like, hey, this kit is false. And he was like, no, there's no way. You just need to shake the bottle way more than you're shaking it. He's telling me how to use an API test kit. I know exactly how to use that kit. So I shook the hell out of it anyway. And it still was showing me like, you know, maybe 5 nitrate when I knew my nitrates were 80. And I went ahead and I just took the kit back and got a new one. And it measured correctly. And it was just a bad kit, which I knew. I just knew. Marcus says, put the whole banana in there. No, I'd rather not. I'd like to eat most of it myself. Well, guys, I'm going to end the stream now because I have other things to do. So we've been talking for about an hour and 21 minutes. We talked about PAR. We talked about your questions. I do want to remind you today's water test Saturday, so please do test your water. We want to test everything. It should not just be it's fine, because it's not fine. We want to know alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, phosphate, nitrate, salinity, temperature, potassium. These are all things we want to know and make sure they're doing well. Make sure your protein skimmers are cleaned out. I did in my reef diary this week, I mentioned briefly, which may have gone right over your head, my protein skimmer collection cups both had to be cleaned and drained. And I did it specifically because a storm was coming. And if there's a storm in your area, it can make your protein skimmer overflow and take all that gunk that's been gathering up in there for a week just to go right back in your sump and release back into the water column. So make sure that you change out your collection cups on those protein skimmers before a storm hits, because when the barometric pressure drops in your area, the protein skimmer overflows. And we don't want that to happen. Also, make sure if you are using some kind of 2-part dosing or 3-part dosing or 4-part or whatever it is you're doing with dosing pumps, make sure that the tubing has not crusted up to where no liquid comes out. Make sure your reservoirs have enough fluid in them. You know, maybe calibrate all your dosers. Maybe you haven't calibrated in 6 months, and it's time to double check to make sure that when you ask for 10 milliliters, you're getting 10 milliliters. So go over all your equipment this weekend and make sure everything's working right, so that way your reef will stay nice and healthy, because as we know, water tests save lives, and if you don't do the testing, you're risking your livestock. So I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys again next Saturday. Bye.